Hey traders, Raghee here, and in this recap video from Simpler Futures, we're going to ask, what does Micron Tech have to do with it? So let's take a look at what's going on with MU. We'll also take a quick look at the crude oil markets and what's happening as we inch closer to this week's Friday decision on what's going to happen with the tariffs and the proposed new round of tariffs that the U.S. is set to implement on the 6th. All right, let's start it off with Micron here. So this ended up being the focal point for a narrative that, really, there was two things that happened today. On one hand, the Chinese customs released early. It was an early release. This is kind of unorthodox. This was a break with protocol. They released the U.S. Export numbers. In other words, what are they exporting to the U.S.? And it's actually less than it's been in some time. So releasing this in the way that they did really was in many ways sort of acknowledging some of what the gripes have been from the Trump administration. So you can kind of look at it as an attempt to sort of start to soothe the kind of heightened rhetoric that we've seen and the proposed threats from both sides. So I thought that was actually somewhat bullish. Now remember, we inherited a bullish sentiment from Tuesday's close, and that was, really what we saw into Tuesday was, or I should say, sorry, Monday's close. What we saw into Tuesday, from Monday's close, was the XLF rallying as the FOMC gave Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley a reprieve, and that helped the Russell, the NASDAQ, and the S&P, and you can check that out in yesterday's recap video. But today, we saw the China narrative sort of start off with an optimistic view, and then all of a sudden things turned around, and you can see where they turned around, and it happened pretty steadily. And you can see not only did we break around 11 o'clock Eastern, but we sold off pretty steadily. And this was after the market was pretty strong. Again, not only going into the close, but into the European session, into the Asian close, and even into the early part of the U.S. market. So what happened around that 11 o'clock? Well, news came out that Micron chip sales were banned in China. So this is going to affect the solid-state hard drives, your memory sticks, and this is really where some of the trade war fears were sort of reignited, because it looks so much like maybe there was a different tone. And then we see here the Micron chip ban. So you could see that happening. Let's go to the 50-minute chart of Micron. Here's that right there. You can see this, the sell-off. Boom, right there. And what else moved in sympathy? NVIDIA is right there. The NASDAQ, big sell-off. And the NASDAQ was already in a fairly bad mood to begin with, because remember, the NASDAQ did not benefit from the financials rally. So the NASDAQ, it kind of gets set aside when it comes to the strength that the S&P and the Dow saw. All right, now what's also an interesting narrative connected to the trade wars? That's crude oil. And crude is going to take it on the chin as well when we have the increased jitters about what could happen on Friday. One thing we're already seeing is that China is importing less crude. And that would probably be most logically explained by, the uncertainty of this trade war with the U.S. Now, if we start to see, and my timeline takes us to the November midterms, not even quite to that point, I'd say 6 to 8 weeks before that, we should see kind of a softening of the rhetoric and more of a cooperative type tone emerging from this, because it's politically expedient right now for the Republicans in the U.S. And let's face it, when you take a look at FXI, which is an ETF for the Hang Seng, you can see just how tough it's been in the Chinese stock market. I mean, the Chinese stock market is in bear territory. So this isn't helping either economy, but I think the reason that we could see something happen sooner rather than later is because we do have this clock ticking towards the November midterms here in the U.S. So overall, am I still a bull? I am still a bull. I think that a lot of these moves, we'll see what happens into Friday, but a lot of these moves continue to be potential corrections. We're going to talk about that in the premium video. What did today's sell-off do going into the holiday weekend? And really, what might we see coming into Thursday and Friday of this week, especially Friday being the big day for the proposed tariffs to be going into action. So we'll see what happens there. We'll talk a lot about these, crude oil, and some of the associated ETFs. We'll also talk about the euro in the premium video as well. See you in the next update.